Um, Imagine being told your entire life that your absolute greatest strength is, well, how much pain you can endure.
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy thought to start with.
Right. And now imagine discovering that this compliment isn't actually praise at all. It's actually a 10,000-year-old psychological cage specifically designed to keep you asleep.
Exactly.
So whether you are looking for a completely new perspective on history or psychology or even modern spirituality, today's deep dive is going to fundamentally challenge how you view personal power.
We are pulling from a profoundly challenging and honestly paradigm-shifting text today. It examined the suppression of the divine feminine specifically, this concept known as the reincarnating primordial mother.
Which, I mean, that phrase might initially sound like this ancient, esoteric, mythological concept.
It does, yeah. But the source material presents it as a highly urgent, intensely practical blueprint. It is a lens for understanding modern burnout, emotional suppression, and what genuine structural awakening actually looks like in our day-to-day lives.
And I love that because usually deep dives into ancient goddess traditions feel like, distant history lessons meant to be kept behind museum glass.
Right, like an academic exercise.
Exactly. But this text reads like an urgent psychological blueprint for how we navigate modern life. It outlines the nearly invisible instructions that patriarchal systems use today, right now, in our workplaces and homes to keep this ancient energy dormant.
It's very grounded in the present.
So the mission of today's deep dive is to unpack exactly how this suppression works, why the system is so terrified of an awakened feminine presence, and what actually happens when someone refuses to carry the weight of the world anymore.
And the foundational premise the text builds upon doesn't just ask what happens when a woman awakens to this primordial power. It asks a much more revealing question.
Which is?
Why are societal systems so fundamentally threatened by it that they built an entire psychological conditioning system around preventing it?
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand why this power is suppressed, we first have to look at the incredibly subtle, counterintuitive mechanism used to suppress it.
Right. It doesn't start with violence or a clear threat.
No, it doesn't. It starts with a compliment. The pervasive instruction in patriarchal systems that the text identifies is simply this: do not let her remember who she is.
And that instruction is enforced through what the source material calls suppression by inspiration.
Suppression by inspiration. That is such a fascinating phrase.
It really is. Basically, when someone carrying the memory of the primordial mother begins to crack open, when the awakening initiates, society immediately rushes in and says, be strong. You are so resilient. Look at everything you've survived.
It's the ultimate trap because it's so difficult to reject a compliment. I mean, think about the modern workplace or complex family dynamics.
Oh, absolutely.
The woman who handles an impossible workload, manages all the invisible emotional labor, and barely sleeps is constantly praised as a superhero.
Right, but that praise redirects the enormous oceanic knowing of awakening into mere productivity. It channels profound spiritual transformation into just coping and endurance.
It's like taking a wild, incredibly powerful racehorse that has been hooked up to a heavy plow in a muddy field.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. And when it manages to drag that plow through the dirt, everyone stands around applauding, saying, wow, look how strong this horse is. Look how well it pulls.
Yeah, exactly.
But the praise itself keeps the horse locked in the wrong job and makes it forget what it was born to do, which is to run free. The compliment is the cage.
That analogy perfectly captures the systemic intention here. Strength, in this specific context, is a trap. The text uses this devastating metaphor to illustrate the erasure.
What's the metaphor?
It argues that telling the mother goddess to be strong is like handing an ocean a bucket and saying, carry yourself.
Oh, wow. Handing an ocean a bucket? That is incredibly vivid.
Right, because she does not need to survive. According to this framework, she generates the conditions where survival is even possible.
So funneling her vast energy into just getting by neutralizes her.
Completely. The systems we navigate daily were built on the premise that this primordial feminine energy is absent. If she remembers who she is, the imitation of current societal structures becomes completely obvious.
Because an imitation can't survive visibility when the real thing is standing right next to it.
Exactly. The substitution cannot survive.
So if the system forces her to cope just to keep that artificial construct running, what happens when she drops the bucket? I mean, what does genuine awakening actually look like when the ocean is allowed to be an ocean?
Well, it looks nothing like the dramatic cultural narratives or the, lightning bolt mystical events we're taught to expect.
No sudden enlightenment where everything is love and light.
Not at all. The text describes it as a profound, bone-level recognition. It's an inability to tolerate diminishing arrangements anymore.
And the source material specifically describes this as finding memory, right? Not just inspiration, but deep history across traditions.
Yes, it explicitly points to ancient traditions,
Yeah.
Sumerian, Yoruba, Dravidian, Celtic, Aboriginal, and pre-Columbian traditions.
Just to clarify for anyone listening, Dravidian refers to the indigenous pre-Vedic cultures of South Asia.
Right, and the text also references Shakta streams, which are Hindu traditions intensely focused on goddess worship as the supreme reality.
So it's not just a poetic archetype.
No, it's a lived reality. And recognizing that reality brings us to the most critical marker of this awakening. It manifests as enormous civilizational grief.
Civilizational grief.
Yes, it is the release of 10,000 years where foundational feminine truth was buried, mocked, and rewritten.
But wait, I have to push back a little here because society usually views grief as a negative state that needs fixing, like a malfunction.
Oh, absolutely. The cultural reflex is to get them back to normal.
Right. So why does the text claim that telling someone to be strong during this specific process is actually interrupting the body's most important work?
What's fascinating here is how we misunderstand the function of this grief. Grief, in this context, is the mechanism through which the physical body releases collective history.
So it's not just a bad day, it's a systemic release.
Exactly. It's a historical release happening through a single nervous system. Very few people can tolerate this grief because it directly indicts the current cultural arrangement.
Ah, I see. So when society tells her to be strong, they're just demanding she resuppress that history.
Yes, simply because her unmanaged grief makes the systemic loss visible to everyone around her. It makes them deeply uncomfortable.
Because it forces them to look at the imitation.
Exactly.
Okay, so you might assume that if mainstream society fails to handle this grief, modern spiritual communities would offer a safe haven, right? You go to a wellness retreat or a mindfulness seminar.
You would think so. But the text reveals that these spaces often deploy an even more insidious form of suppression
Oh, so?
because it wears the language of liberation. In spiritual spaces, the blunt instruction to be strong is replaced by phrases like, don't attach to suffering.
Oh, I've heard that one.
Right, or everything serves your highest good. You chose this experience. Hold the frequency of love.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because those phrases are everywhere in modern wellness culture.
They are. And while they aren't always wrong in the abstract, when applied to the awakening feminine, they function as spiritual bypassing.
Spiritual bypassing. Using spiritual concepts to avoid dealing with harsh systemic realities.
Exactly. They use the vocabulary of liberation to redirect energy away from embodied knowing and political reality back into a state that is manageable for everyone else.
It's like putting a fresh coat of good vibes paint over a crumbling foundation.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
You look at the pastel walls and say, wow, what an enlightened house. But the floorboards are actively rotting underneath your feet. It looks enlightened on the surface, but it's really just a fancier, spiritually dressed version of the Be Strong trap. It keeps her sleeping.
Precisely. Patriarchal spirituality has consistently denigrated the material world. The goal is always to ascend, to transcend the messy reality of the body.
But the text argues the opposite, right?
Yes, the awakening requires a descent into the body, into the earth, and into material reality. It is not an ascent or flight from the world. It is a radical claiming of it.
Which makes sense because a sleeping goddess is totally safe. She suffers within a permitted range, and she's spiritual without being the actual source of authority.
Exactly. But an awake goddess doesn't need to be managed, which strips certain forms of authority of their jurisdiction entirely because she operates from the actual ground of existence.
Okay, so we've seen how she is suppressed at work, in society, and even in these spiritual retreats. But why go to such lengths?
To understand that, we have to shift from viewing this merely as a personal struggle to understanding the massive cosmological stakes involved.
Which is a huge shift for a Western audience.
It really is. Western discourse treats the reincarnating mother goddess as a nice poetic metaphor, a psychological archetype.
Right, like a symbol for nurturing.
But in living traditions, like the Shakta streams, West African traditions, and indigenous cosmologies we mentioned earlier, it is literal cosmological reality.
So her awakening is not personal development.
No, it is a cosmic event. Preventing her awakening is about preventing a cosmological correction.
So what does this all mean? If she actually stops enduring and lets the unbearable situation finally be unbearable, the text says it leads to the end of a particular kind of order. Are the systems right to fear this? I mean, does this awakening just lead to chaos and vengeance?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the text explicitly refutes that. The fear of vengeance, the idea that whoever takes power must dominate the other, is a patriarchal logic projected onto her.
We assume she'll do to the system what the system did to her.
Right. But the primordial feminine does not function through domination. It is not chaos. It is simply the end of the imitation.
So what's on the other side?
On the other side is arrival, remembering. It is the mother recognized in the world she generated, a return to a natural order.
Which fundamentally changes what she actually needs right now. She doesn't need another resilience seminar or a heavier bucket.
No, not at all. She needs to be told her body is right, her feelings are real, and her cosmological identity is literal truth. She needs space for unmanaged grief.
And most urgently, she needs the courage to stop enduring, to let the unbearable situation finally be unbearable.
Exactly. The text leaves us with this powerful image of the mother finally awake in the world she generated.
It's incredible to think about. And for you listening, think about your own life. How often do you praise someone's endurance and resilience when what they actually need is the space to fall apart and remember their true power?
Yeah, that's the real question.
How often do we use good vibes to bypass real systemic grief?
And just to build on that, think about the very language we use every single day. If words like strength and resilience have actually been weaponized to maintain the status quo and keep us enduring the unbearable, what entirely new vocabulary do we need to invent to describe true sovereign power without immediately trying to manage or control it?
Wow. That is a brilliant question to leave off on. We have to question those invisible instructions, drop the bucket, and let the ocean be the ocean. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.